Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are back on the suggestions passed to the developers in December 2018, and we're looking at the last part of this mammoth amount of stuff which was actually sent to the developers in December. So the last part I wanted to save for a video by itself because it's very extensive and it covers a ridiculous amount of topics, so I thought why not individually do a video on it, and it is called the Minor Axis Nations, and it's basically represented here by Steph. And the reason why I wanted to do a single video on it is because I want to make sure that you guys understand how extensive this is, and also why, even though I always say, you should go and read this stuff yourself as well to get a general inkling of what's going on, I would say if you don't want to, read anything else in the suggestions, make sure to read this one, because it is insanely, it has so much information in it, which is a wonderful thing, and it reminds me of the Swedish tech tree stuff, where people have poured a lot of love and a lot of ideas into these, and it is nice to see that they are finally getting passed on to the developers. Also, Gaijin have said that they're looking to add other nations this year, and maybe this is one of the things that we're going to see this year, some kind of combined idea of nations. Now, the three people I want to thank for creating this are, if we just go down here, are Steph, Cald, and Nell Lucifer. Now, I've actually been in contact with Nell, and it seems like, from his standpoint, this was basically his words, that the project itself at the moment is kind of on standby, and the reason for this is because the other two guys are pretty busy with their, actual lives. So right now, what has been passed on, at least from what he's told me, is kind of out of date compared to what they already have, but I also would like to maybe sit down and have like a War Thunder chat with him, or do a few more videos looking into this stuff and basically going through some of the ideas. He also has provided me an updated ground forces tree, which has a ridiculous amount of stuff to it, which is a lot more comprehensive than the Minor Axis Nations tree that we see here. So understand that this project is still ongoing, but the guys who are working on it do not have a ton of free time right now. So let's go through the basis of what the Minor Axis Nations tree is. Well, I mean, the title kind of tells you itself. It's trying to gather together all of the smaller nations which took part in World War II on the Axis side of things. Now, they've made a few concessions here. So the six smaller main ones are Romania, Hungary, Finland, Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Croatia. And of course, in the post-war part, Czechoslovakia being part of the overall tree as well, since countries obviously changed after World War II. If you want some more information on that, I would definitely say go and have a look at Eastern European history. It's definitely, interesting. I suppose maybe Central European? I would say it's Eastern European, but that's just me. Anyway, so the idea is you, instead of just relegating all of these nations' individual independent tanks to the major tech trees and becoming premiums or becoming part of them, why not have a tree just by themselves, which is all conglomerated? Now, I've talked about a Commonwealth tree in the past. This is kind of the same idea, but for the other side of the coin. And the reason why these nations have been picked is because they all have interesting independent ideas when it comes to their aircraft, when it comes to their ground, and also naval forces. But on top of this, they're all technically on the same side. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, what about Finland when, they were fighting on the German side, but are they neutral? Same with Slovakia, Romania. There's going to be a lot of debate whether, these countries should be on the Axis side. I'm not going to go into it today. Really can't be bothered. That is probably like a 5-hour video of going through all of the different histories of each nation. But anyway, so some notes that they've made. So Finland wasn't an Axis member, but they got a lot of support from Germany and fought with them against the Soviet Union. So you could also call this tree Allies of Germany tree. And with the Ribbentrop letter of agreement, I think it is okay to call them an ally of Germany. It's better to have Finland in the Axis tree than no Finland at all. And I kind of agree with what Steph says here as well. Like, the main reason for a Commonwealth tree is because I personally believe that a lot of the Commonwealth countries are not fairly represented in this game yet, and it would be nice if we, to find a way to represent them is to put them all into one tree. I think that's the way to go. Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, they were no real Axis member or fought more against them than with them together, so I added instead Croatia and Slovakia to get some more interesting vehicles, and Czechoslovakia was after the war part of the Warsaw Pact, so I added them for the higher tiers again. So once again, making a few concessions here, but I think that's okay. There was also an alternative version with Italy, and without the post-war stuff of the other Axis nations, can be found at the bottom of the topic. So, let's go through all of this, because it ain't just ground vehicles, it ain't just air vehicles, there's also some naval stuff in here, and there's also a bunch of other stuff. So, as I said, main premise is to get all the minor nations together and put them into one tree. What is also nice here is that there's a little bit of history about each nation, where it is in the world, what was its impact in World War II, what happened with it, and for me personally, this is wonderful. If you generally don't know a lot about these countries when it comes to World War II, obviously coming from England and moving to Canada, I hear a hell of a lot about, the English participation in World War II, the American participation, the Canadian participation. But the only time I've actually been able to learn about, Finland and stuff like the Winter War is basically through reading by myself. So for me, it is very important to know the general history of these areas, and what is wonderful about this article is it goes through small little general histories, so you can kind of get an idea of what side they were on, where they were fighting, and basically what was going on in the country at the time. So, let's look at the first Air Force release tree. This is the first one that comes up in the article itself, and what is lovely is they actually add in little blurbs after it. So instead of just getting the tree, you get a little bit of information on each of the aircraft. Now for me, I think I might do individual videos on these trees as well, because there's so much going on, but I think I may also do some on the Swedish tech trees as well. But thinking about it, this is a hell of a lot of work, so I'm gonna see where I'm at when I'm feeling a little bit better. But there's individual links to pretty much everything, and even to the IAR series, it tells you what's the difference between them all. So, let's get into the tree itself, which is this one. So, the first line is obviously biplanes and some very early monoplanes, the Avian and the Hasia, and you can already see that we are mixing nations in these trees, which I think will just have to be something that happens after a while. You see the Romanian line, because they had the predominant amount of aircraft, or at least fighter aircraft at the time, and when it comes to ground attackers and bombers and then fighter line, we have the other countries involved, and as along with Romania as well. There's even an IAR-81 with the Gnome Roan engine here, which is interesting to see. Then you got the L-29. If you don't know about the L-29, I would highly say have a look at it. And then you got the Avia S-92. You may be looking at that and thinking, I've seen this idea before. What does this plane look like? Well, if you didn't know, there was actually some parts of the Me-262 which were manufactured in let's just make sure I don't get this wrong, because I've got a feeling somebody's going to have a go at me. So Czechoslovakia, there we go. So the Me-262 was contracted for parts of it to be built in that area in World War II, and they even got some blueprints and plans to fully produce, an Me-262. Now, I believe when I read about it, they didn't actually create any fully done. They just made parts, but they did have the schematics, they did have the ideas behind them, and eventually, they would have fully built them and used them for their Air Force, but they were mainly used contractually to build them for Germany. There's also what seems to be a Bf-109 in this tree, but the mainstay of this aircraft tree is obviously the IARs. We do have an IAR in the game, which is in the Italian tree right now, and as is said at the start of the article, it would be such a shame if this tree goes to waste and isn't added in its entirety. Instead, it's just left to the gutter to be put into the Italian tree. Once again, a ton of different models here from each of the countries, which is wonderful to see. And now onto the Ground Forces release tree. Now, as I said, we have the Ground Forces release tree, which looks like this. This is the one from the article, but we do have an updated version as well, so let's just have a look at that instead. This is the Axis Warsaw Pack tree, and this one I want to go through by itself on a video, point out some of the interesting vehicles, because for me, there are just some wonderful things in here. So first of all, we have some Skodas, some LTs, a lot of French designs. The BT-42 makes its way into this tree. Then you have some interesting AA machines, which are pretty much just trucks with cannons or machine guns on the back. Then you have some tanks which resemble Panzers, but they are not. They are Turans and they are Toldies. Now, these are completely different to Panzers, and they are really, really cool. I'm going to go through the Turan series of tanks at some point, and also the Toldies. It is a straight line, as you can see. There is a ton of tanks here, more than the Italians have when it comes to their medium tanks, and it would be a real shame if they weren't added to the game. That doesn't mean that other nations do not have any tanks. You have the T-4075, the 105mm was that V218N Panther, which looks like a ridiculous machine. And then you have some tank destroyers in the form of the Maresel, the LT PSV-41, and the 43M Sorozat Vito. Now for them, they've made premium lines as well, as you may have seen on the aircraft tree. They've created some premiums alongside everything. Obviously, this is just their suggestions, so it may change if this is ever added to the tree, or added to the game. I just hope it does. I really do. There's a lot of cool ideas here, and it would be very sad to see it not added. There's also some machines which are modified from German machines, so you may look at the T-4276 and be like, that looks very similar than the T-34-100, and then obviously the T-34-85 Mod 65 and Mod 80, and then of course the Stug 3 here. So there are machines which heavily take from other nations, but that doesn't mean for me they should not be added. You also have the 40M Nimrod, which is great to see, and I am surprised that this makes an appearance. The T-34-85 with the 57mm. So what they did was they took off the turret of the T-34-85, and they wanted to create some kind of AA battery, so they found a 57mm, and they added kind of just an open top to it, and the idea was this was designed to shoot down aircraft. Obviously, this didn't really go too well. I believe there was maybe 2 prototypes made, or at least 2 wooden mock-ups and 1 made. When I read about it, it was about 2 years ago, so it's a long time ago. And then you've got some interesting stuff such as the Model 89 here, and then the TR-77s, and of course the TR-85s, along with some BMPs, and, well, guess what makes its return? It's another Gepard copy. Gotta love it. And then, of course, some LMI 84Ms. So it'll be interesting to see if any more stuff could be added after this point. I suppose we did go a little bit more modern since this thing was updated, and I feel like it would be great to see. But for me, I am focused on this bit. I think this, to me, would be a very fun tree, a lot more fun than the early French and early to mid-Italians that we got. There is just so much variation here and so much you can add. It would just warm my heart to see this in-game. So you may think, well, that's just 2 things, That's just 2 full release trees that could be added. Is there anything else? And once again, all of the ideas are added for each of the machines. So if you want some general information without having to do a Google search to find these ground vehicles, you can right here. And some of them have pictures, some obviously don't. And some are, as I said, copies of other vehicles, but that's completely fine. I personally don't like it, but since we have a massive number of vehicles here, some copies, would be completely fine. You could just take them out of the tree because there's so many. Then a personal note is added, and here we have 2 tech trees, which could be, or at least at the time of making this, remember that this was added in the 18th of November 2017. So it was looking at not just adding in Axis trees, but also the Italian trees. So as a personal note, 2 trees are added, which could be, how the Italian trees look like. So the ground forces and the air forces at this point. So this is what the ground forces could look like, and the idea was to mix the Italian tree with the other Axis nations. Gaijin did say last year, when they added in the IAR, and I believe another machine, maybe even before the IAR, that they wanted to kind of put some of the minor Axis nations into Italy just to kind of fill it out a bit. So if you don't like the suggestion of just having a minor Axis tree by itself, well, you could always fill in a pre-existing Italian tree that we have in game with a bunch of vehicles that you see here, such as the Toldis and the Tirans and the Takams, and then of course some stuff like the 43Ms and everything else like the Nimrod and the Panther Aus D and the TAS production, which, to be honest, the 44M, it's an interesting thing to talk about. Once again, I will do a video on the tree itself and show pictures, but the 44M I don't think was ever fully built, so yeah, it's a little bit of a dodgy one from my point of view. But yeah, it's nice that they've added in both of these trees, because they have shown that they are open to the idea that instead of just having their own separate tree for the minor Axis, there is an opportunity to be able to fill it, or fill an Italian tree with these ideas too. They even put some French aircraft in here for some reason, but overall, it is possible. Look at that, the Martin X /5. I have no idea what that is, but I am interested and intrigued, and that is the most important part. I suppose the MB-152, I'm guessing that's under Vichy France? Is that what it's talking about? Yeah, maybe. But anyway, there's a ton of content here and a ton of ideas to have a look at for you at your desks or wherever you are, to just go through and be like, ooh, I wonder what that is. One of the great things about looking at the Swedish tech tree, looking at these fan-made tech trees, is it gets your mind going. It gets the hamster rolling, and it gets you looking at machines and going, I've never heard of that. Maybe it's a copy of this. Maybe it's a different name of that. Maybe it's just a different plane altogether. Who knows? And it means that you can dig into histories of planes and tanks and naval stuff that you never knew even existed. And for me, that is awesome. Really, really gets my mind going. The last part, after going through, the Italian tech trees that could be added, the other 2 tech trees, and all of the information, there is also a little bit on Naval release tree. Now, it doesn't actually give an image for this, but it does give several machines, when it comes to Naval, that they would like to see in a Naval release tree for this minor Axis nation. Because now, with War Thunder, you can't just think about, an aircraft tree, you have to think about an air, ground, naval, and then also helicopters. So it isn't just as simple as creating one, tree. Now you have to create 4. So they've created 3 here, plus some extra Italian ones, and it is a great place to start when it comes to Gaijin if they want to add in something like this. So there's a little bit of information here about the ships that could be added, mainly from Romania and Finland, and some from Croatia itself, and also one from Bulgaria, the Drazki. And the main thing to understand is this is a work in progress. So I'm sure if you hit up, Nell, and he still wants to work on the project as well as the other guys, we can, as a community, give them a little bit of help to push this forward, to try and get it fully done up instead of the state here, which I would say is like 90% done from the ground and air point of view, and then maybe 50% done from the naval point of view. So we could definitely push this over the edge and create something magical to see in the game. Now, obviously, this is all speculation, since it's just been passed to the developers. It doesn't really mean anything, but this, to me, out of the suggestions passed, is the most complete, most interesting, and has the most information of it after, going through the past developers over the last year, and it just makes me incredibly happy that Gaijin are looking at this and trying to take ideas. I'm hoping that we see something like this in War Thunder, and if we don't, what we will see is something such as the premiums, some premiums from this nation, which would be the worst outcome, but it is still an outcome where we can see some of these great beasts come to the game. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.